we'll be covering it for you as best we can with our little brains. I guess my brain, Chris Spags here, and one of the larger brains in the world. So I want to sell your brain short, Eddie. Mr. Fast Eddie Fair, how are you doing?
I am good. I had no idea you were into amateur phrenology. That's very interesting.
Yes, there was a lot of scientific thought that went into that one. And that's also why that scientific thought, you know what, that pays off a lot of dividends. If you go to Thrive Fantasy, one of our sponsors of this here Live Before Lock show, Thrive Fantasy is a new DFS app where players draft a lineup built to prop bets of only top tier athletes. If you pick 10 props out of the 20, less probable a prop is to occur, the more points it's worth, and that's where the game theory kicks in for you. So go ahead, download the Thrive Fantasy app now. I'm going to put the link in the YouTube chat for you guys. They're giving away still very generous deposit bonuses, $10 on any $10 deposit, $20 on a $100 deposit, and $50 for $200 or more. So go support them because they support us, and that helps us keep the lights on here. Check it out now. Eddie, the prop bet we're going to talk about du jour up front. It's an important game to talk about. LeBron James, they have with an over-under of 28.5 points. On the over, you're getting 90. On the under, you're getting 110. I'm going over here. I have him at 29.3. How are you feeling about LeBron?
Yeah, hard to imagine that, they don't push hard here. They've really got to do something fairly close to winning out. Not quite winning out, but they got to win, some 80-90% of their last 20 games or so. So you have to expect them to push pretty hard. Hard to think you don't get that much out of LeBron, so I think I had him a touch over 30. So, yeah, I'll take the over even with the reduced incentivization there.
Yeah, so I think there you go. There's our prop bet. So take it to the bank right now on Thrive Fantasy. Download the app, click the link in the YouTube chat, or type in bit.ly/Awesemo to go check out Thrive now. I'm just going to update my sheet. But, Eddie, let's talk about that Lakers game a little more because that is one of the high totals. Again, another day of super high totals again. So could see fantasy scores go through the roof here. Yeah. But how are we feeling about this Bucks-Lakers game and the prospects for LeBron and his little teammates there who do need to win everything?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a game in which we have a lot of interest. We saw, Rondo get back in there and starting, and they're going to go that way again tonight. Hard not to have, at his still reduced price, some interest, certainly in him. There's a lot of point guards in that mid-range I like, and depending on how chalky he ends up being, I have a fair amount of affection for Elfrid Payton and even Chris Dunn. I really like in this spot, so I think at reduced ownership for him, I'll want some pieces of that. If you go all the way up to Bledsoe, that makes sense in this game. Yeah, this is it's interesting just because I'm sort of all over, the Hawks game and the Suns game and even the Clippers-Kings game. So this game, while it, still sports a very impressive total, obviously, due to the player prices, I find it to be just a scotch less appealing than the other games. No one's going to, deride you for making LeBron the centerpiece of your lineup tonight. It's really interesting to know what to do with Giannis here, because Giannis is just way too cheap on FanDuel if he's going to play that amount of time. Like, if we think that he plays his full normal minutes and doesn't get, jerked around like he did in that last game and have his minutes and usage limited and so on and so forth. One thing I would caution is that this is the front end of a back-to-back for the Bucks. So... I'm probably not going to deploy Giannis unless I specifically hear, Giannis will play his normal minutes, will not be in any way limited today from the coaching staff. Even if they,
It seemed like the reports were saying that he's going to be ramped back up slowly to make sure that, I think the quote I saw is that he has to feel really, really good and they're going to slowly ramp him up. Right. So, I mean, what does that mean to you minutes-wise, if that is the case? To me, that means 28, maybe.
Yeah, I have him for 28, so I'm right with you there. That is
there we go. That's a little telekinetic there. I like that.
Yeah, well, it's not telekinetic unless you use the force of your mind to lift me off my chair or something, but I get where you were going.
You know what? What am I thinking of? There's a similar one.
Telepathic, I think, is what you're going for.
Telepathic. Damn. You know what? It was telekinetic. Actually, I didn't lift you. I thought I did. I thought I saw you move.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, you do get a rise out of me sometimes. You're a good looking
Might have just been your desk going up because
you're a good looking man.
Enthusiasm for the slate. So here, let me float a theory to you about this game because I'm actually with you. I think this Lakers game is a little interesting. I'm not getting to Ingram and Kuzma as much as I usually do. But Rondo is going to be a popular play. He had that big day the other night. Got a start, obviously, which helps him out. I think he's sort of like a quarterback in the NFL where if I'm playing him with a guy who he's going to be assisting, and I think that's sort of where he's going to get his value today. The Bucks giving up a ton of 3-point attempts. I think one of Kuzma or Bullock heats up, so I think that's where I'm thinking with Rondo, where I'll play him if in the hopes that he's kind of going and that gets another guy juiced and gets him going. But I'm not super comfortable playing Rondo on his own. But what are your thoughts on Rondo here? Because he is pretty cheap on DraftKings given the ceiling that he's shown.
Yeah, I'm absolutely fine with him on either one. I don't think you need to play him with anyone else. It's tough to afford, more than maybe 2 players from this game. Obviously, this game is very stackable. So if you want to play, Rondo, Kuzma, LeBron, Eric Bledsoe, and Brook Lopez or something, you can obviously get there, and the prices make that a touch easier on DraftKings. But I'm fine with naked Rondo, as we say in the football business.
Okay, that's fair. It's just a little pet theory of mine because I think, from what I've seen with teams of the Bucks, you'll see these guys like a Tomas Satoransky type who will really have the assist upside go up, and you'll see one of the big shooters on the wings kind of get going. So that's just a pet theory I have, no data to back it up.
Yeah, I can just see. I mean, I like him more with LeBron than with Kuzma than with Ingram, just because of the way they work together. Ingram, can end up being more of a distributor with Rondo in there. You get a little bit less of that, so he would come in as fourth for me, both for my desire to play them and for how well he correlates with Rondo between those other 3 guys. So I certainly, get your point that if he's going to throw a number of touchdowns, someone has to convert them. But there are, I think it's perfectly possible that you see, everyone else have a decent game, and like if they all get 40 fantasy points, Rondo is the one you wanted, and he could get 4 dimes to each of those 3 other guys. That's not impossible to me. So he's objectively cheap enough that I'm fine with naked Rondo. But certainly if you're upside hunting in general, there's obviously some correlation in a game there that everyone has some upside to try to come at hard.
All right, so before we move on from this game, talk about the Milwaukee side super fast. We talked about Giannis, but if we're saying he's going to get potentially 28 minutes, which I think we both predicted, then where are we feeling about Middleton? Eric Bledsoe obviously had the big day versus Sacramento, went nuts, almost 70 fantasy points.
Yeah.
Malcolm Brogdon also a high as well. So how are you feeling about those guys? And do you think they're getting a boost because of Giannis having potentially 10 minutes less than he usually does?
Yeah, I think that's fairly common sense that obviously he's a monster usage guy, and if we think he's going to play 5 minutes less, we'll say, than he normally plays. I will point out that obviously he was playing extremely well, but Bledsoe got all the way up to 36 minutes in that last game. That's not something you tend to see. For some reason, that game didn't go to overtime, did it? It was obviously
it did. The Bucks game, yeah, it did.
It did. Okay, that's what it was. All right, so hold on, I got to change out my rotation here. Yeah, there it is. Okay, good. Yeah, but it makes some sense that at least the usage is going to appropriate around a little bit for the less time on the court. They'll get a few extra shots out of these other guys who would be out there astride, and most of the minutes are just going to flow to Ilyasova, Mirotic. But there's also some extra usage floating around because they're currently without both Sterling Brown and George Hill. So you end up with, Pat Connaughton will end up playing 25 or 26 minutes instead of 18. I don't think he's good enough in a world of some of the other value plays who are out there, basically. But he is the flat minimum on DK. I would probably rather play Pat Connaughton than Bembry. Bembry with Jalen Adams back, even at the minimum price on DK, which does seem a little bit odd. It's possible he plays in the minutes in teens. Like, I would rather play Pat Connaughton. If I'm looking for a cheap hawk swing, I would probably rather play Kevin Huerter, who they've made much more of a commitment to over the year. Played 30 minutes in the last game. Right now I have Huerter for 30 minutes and Bembry for 23. And you can get less than that out of Bembry. Like, that can happen. So... with Adams healthy and Bembry not even playing the backup point when he's out there, I'm fine playing Bembry because there is a ceiling there and he costs nothing. But, my favorite super cheap punt now is Amari Spellman by a pretty significant margin. And I'd go a few other places before I got to Bembry for what it's worth, just as a quick aside.
All right, well, we'll talk more about that game, but I want to hit one more because I think this one's going to be a question a lot of people have, and I've seen a lot of talk about the Pelicans today. So I have some concerns here. I'm still playing a good amount of Randall, a good amount of Holiday, but I didn't go above the field, even though I like their spot a lot. So I'm worried about the front end of a back-to-back. And the last time we saw these guys in the front of a back-to-back, They cut the minutes down to, I think, mid-20s for them. And the game was getting out of hand, but was still in range enough where you could have justified putting him back in there. I'm a little worried that's going to be the case today for those guys. So tell me what you're thinking about the Pelicans here, because they're in another great spot here, and Phoenix as well. But this matchup could be good, or it could go south.
Yeah, I love them. The matchup is just too good, and the prices on them, especially if you look, say, on DraftKings, are just too good. On FanDuel, there's some pivots I like moving to off of some of these other guys at their prices, but on DK, it's really hard to get away from, most specifically, Randall Holiday and Elf. Elf, I'm really not terribly worried about the minutes, regardless of what's going on there. Again, as you mentioned, it's important. Yeah, so the front end of the back-to-back teams are the Nets, which is one reason I really needed to be loaded up on something to go very heavily on the Nets. Like, having one GPP guy, you can play D'Angelo Russell, you can play Jared Allen, you can always play Ed Davis at his price, but outside of that, I want absolutely nothing to do with the Nets. The Lakers play again tomorrow, and the Bucks play again tomorrow. It's the Pelicans and the Suns. Those are the five. Yeah, it's those five. Play again tomorrow. So, and no one's on the back end again. No one played yesterday and is playing today. But yeah, on DK, they're just way too cheap. Like with Anthony Davis in and playing his full minutes, the only other time this year these two teams played, which is interesting. There's a tough video spot where a lot of these teams you would think would have played multiple times. This is only the second time the Wizards and the Celtics played this year. Only the second time these two teams got together. But you had Brow get his 60, and you still got 45 plus out of Drew and out of Julius Randle, and that's not at all surprising. It's a really beautiful spot. The limited minutes for Brow, the filling in with other, less demanding offensive players, it's really hard. These guys are just all objectively well too cheap. So FanDuel, I kind of prefer playing my Lauri Markkanen alongside my Amari Spellman, but DK, hard for me not to have in a single lineup two of those Pelicans. They're just objectively well too cheap.
Yeah, I think they're in a good spot. So no minutes risk concern at all for you. You think they're getting their full allotment?
Oh, I absolutely have minutes concern. I've been a little dubious on Drew Holiday for the last 4 games because they came out and said they were going to limit his minutes going forward, and then really haven't. They have, just not as much as they said. Like, he's still getting 34, 35, 36. He had been getting 38, so I guess that's sort of a limitation. But even if you told me right now Drew Holiday is going to play 32 minutes, he's still really good. Like, he'd still be very, very good against with everything he's doing for this team against the Suns. So, you'd need it to really fall off a cliff, and that is a very reasonable point of concern. But they've never even specifically mentioned Randall, so it would seem odd that they went out of their way right here. But the combination of they certainly could, you could end up with a blowout either way in this game. I suppose that's with any game. But I can see the minutes being concerned, and it's a bit more of one on the front end of a back-to-back, but I'm inclined to risk it. That being said, I certainly don't have an issue with someone limiting themselves to one of those 3 guys and going around and picking any of the other great guys that are on, the Bulls or the Kings or the Clippers, who are all in similarly great spots.
So we talked a little bit about Holiday and Randall. How about Elfrid Payton, who's in technically a revenge spot? And I think this is one case where he actually has a pretty justifiable case for being a little bitter at them. They didn't handle him very well, traded for him, didn't feature him in any way. It's his first game versus Phoenix since moving to New Orleans. So any interest in him? He's pretty cheap, and he has shown some upside.
Yeah, no, I mentioned him again as one of the 3 guys on this team that I'm super interested in on DK. He's fine on FanDuel. FanDuel, if you're playing those point guard spots, you're paying more for him than you're paying for Chris Dunn, who I actually have projected almost exactly the same. I really like Chris Dunn in this spot. And he's, again, just a little bit too cheap everywhere. But you're then playing him over Rondo and paying a good bit more. You're playing him over Chris Dunn. You're not playing Bledsoe for just a little bit more. So FanDuel easier for me to get away. But yeah, on DraftKings, I'm a really big fan of, this is low-key triple-double spot for the Elf. So, yeah.
Yeah, the unimpressive 11, 10, and 10 triple-double.
Yeah, the Ben Simmons triple-double of yesterday. But again,
the TJ McConnell special one time.
Yeah, the Ray Felton triple-double was what we used to call it. Ray Felton did that frequently.
Oh, that's right. The fat man at a YMCA triple-double. That's that kind of one.
He gets a lot of fat jokes thrown at him. I don't know quite why. He's
He's got like the face. He's actually not in bad shape. He's
right,
like a little
that's
burly.
the thing. He has a round face. I think that is very well said.
He's no CJ Anderson, that much is for sure. How about the Phoenix side here? A pretty big boost from Vegas. They're getting a 9.8 point boost on their normal season average. It seems like a spot to load up on. Devin Booker playing. His toe's been limiting him, so he was questionable until this morning, but he's in. DeAndre Ayton projecting pretty well, but the ceiling hasn't really been there. Kelly Oubre's ceiling has been there. He intrigues me quite a bit, but what are you thinking about the Sun side?
Yeah, I think, across the board, a little bit less excited than the guys we're talking about on a couple of these other teams, but especially if we're playing a lot of Pelicans, we're certainly going to want to consider running it back with a Sun or two here and there. I do like Devin Booker quite a lot. It's difficult on DK to spend up $300-400 on him over, say, Drew Holiday in a single lineup, but if you're running, say Randall and Elf, he makes a very logical play back there at that realm of price. It's just, I like Kemba Walker a little bit more, so that makes it a little bit sticky. So there's just a lot of guys in that price range that make it a little tougher for Devin Booker, but I like him a lot. I don't have an issue with you running Tyler Johnson. I don't have an issue with you running out McCall Bridges again in what's a great spot. I mean, guys against the Suns and guys against the Pelicans are two spots we've been, really happy of looking at guys. And I actually like Ayton a lot. He's one of my top 4 or 5 centers. Probably doesn't make it in one lineup, but I think there's a lot of merit to DeAndre Ayton. So, I mean, I'm probably looking at them Booker the most, then Ayton, and then you're choosing whether or not to take a shot at Tyler Johnson or Kelly Oubre. But having Booker back in there, I do think he's full strength. I have him for his full minutes allocation. Gives you a better chance of this team just sort of having its production a little bit. Like, you can get a game where you get 44 out of Booker and 37 out of Ayton and, 30 out of Bridges, 27 out of Tyler Johnson. Like, you can manage to have nobody be good in this spot. Unlikely, but less excited than for the Pelicans, where I really am going to be surprised if at least 2 out of the 3 of those 3 guys, because just the production is a little bit more centered and the matchup is a little bit better there.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's sort of my concern. Booker hasn't really spiked the upside too much recently. He's had like 160-point game within the last few weeks, but not much besides that. Ayton too. Like, I think Ayton's a better player than earlier this year when he put up 39 fantasy points versus the Pelicans. But it's hard to see him getting to like even 50, and I think that sort of makes them a little bit less appealing. But I think that total does back it up. So I have some exposure. I think going with the field on these guys probably makes the most sense to me. So I think I'm mostly with you. And less enthusiasm than I would have thought for the Suns, because they just don't. They let me down a lot. I feel like, me personally, that's an affront to my beliefs. Let's talk about the Boston-Washington game. You mentioned that a little bit up front, but that's another game with a very high total. Boston also expected to have a much higher boost on their season average than usual. We got Kyrie, who's going to be one of the higher-owned guys on the slate. Al Horford also in that mix. Washington side should be a tough defensive match, but Bradley Beal's been killing it, and they blew out the Nets the other day. Kind of got closer at the end, but that was a blowout. How are we feeling about this game, and are you stacking up some Celtics? Because it seems like a spot to stack up some Celtics.
I don't think I want to stack up some Celtics. I think some Celtics will obviously be good, but they are much more middling with their minutes, especially when they're in a blowout or on their way towards one. So it's less likely that you pull a significant minutes total out of one of these guys. There are just other guys I like a little bit more at most of these spots. So I want, a Celtic in my lineup if I can possibly manage it. But I'm disinclined towards stacking them. If there were teams I was going to stack today, Celtics are probably number 5 or 6 on the list, simply because I need this game to stay super competitive for that to be relevant. And in Boston, I just don't necessarily see that being the case. Obviously, this is not the Boston team that we expected at the start of the year, and they've been struggling a lot, but they're still a couple of tiers ahead of these Wizards. No offense to anyone. I don't know.
I disagree a little. I mean, Boston's lost 6 in a row. They're still obviously the talent's there, but the Wizards are playing like a unit. They're playing well. They've also, I think on the strategy show the other day, the guys mentioned that they had some pact where they were trying to win out the rest of the year to hit their win goal for what they had earlier in the season. So they're playing with like a bit of motivation. The Celtics are the opposite way, where they're playing very disjointed all over the place. You see Kyrie, his usage went up versus Portland, but that was just him trying to play hero ball a little bit, and he didn't quite get there. So I like the Celtics. I think the Vegas total seems to support them kind of having a bounce back game. But I think Washington stays in this one. I just have a feeling about that. I think that's a big Beal day coming.
Yeah, I mean, If I'm forced to rank these guys, Marcus Morris is probably my favorite. He makes the most sense on paper for me. The price is most advantageous. I'm never going to argue with someone playing, especially forward eligible Al Horford at 6,400 against the Wizards. It's just a fine spot for them, and they did play close when they played earlier this year. This is again only the second matchup, even though they're both in the East. The Celtics did win the first one in Washington by 5, I think it was, so that turned out to be kind of a close game. But the FanDuel prices are not that exciting. Tatum at 6,400 stands out at the best, but again, I really want to play Randall or Spellman or Markin or just other guys, so he's not getting into first lineup. Marcus Smart's $1,000 cheaper on DK. That works. I'm perfectly excited for that in a tournament, but he's not a guy whose production we can really count on. So Jaylen Brown isn't really consistent. So what it really ends up being is Morris, Horford. Hayward is $4,100, but I don't want to do Hayward with Kyrie and Kyrie at $8,900. I like less than a number of guys. I like him less than Damian Lillard. There we go. Let me get that one out there. That should be sort of a hot take. Damian Lillard plays very well against Kyle Lowry, repeatedly, over and over again. I didn't have time to pull it up, but Lillard Lowry is a thing I've been looking at for a while, where he tends to. Let me see what I got here. Let's get some numbers.
I feel like a lot of guys play well against Kyle Lowry. Like, he must agitate them in a certain way where a lot of these guys bring their best for him.
Well, no, it's actually really divided. Like, he is he's a smaller guard who tends to face up a lot more. So there are guys who have the moves to handle him and guys who they just own his game. So he's actually got just a whole batch of guys I really dislike when I expect Kyle Lowry to be their primary defender. And a batch of guys I really like playing against him. Yeah, so we'll go back to all the games since 2016. Damian Lillard's fantasy point totals in the 4 games he started against Kyle Lowry are 55, 62, 46, and 55. So, 3 out of 4, 55 plus. They obviously don't play all that often. But I've watched all these games, and I'm looking at a couple paragraphs of notes I have here. And yeah, long story short, I like it very much as a micro matchup. For him, he's the player I'm most interested in this game, and I expect we have his ownership pretty damn low. So I have him projected for 3 less than Kemba Walker, and right on line with Kyrie Irving. So I would play Damian Lillard for what I presume would be much, much lower ownership.
All right. I think let's use it as a tangent then, because you mentioned ownership. Let's talk about we'll do halftime daddy likes 3 minutes early, because I think we need to hit on that Clippers game, and we're going to go over if we do that now. So we'll talk about it organically, because this daddy likes at halftime is going to give you a lot of Sacramento guys up top. Number 1 on the list, Eddie, Willie Cauley-Stein, 40% projected ownership on DraftKings. How does daddy feel about that?
Yeah, I love him. I do think the absence of Bagley does help a little bit. It certainly doesn't hurt. We'll put it that way. And we had seen, barring stupid foul trouble games against Karl Anthony Towns, that he was getting back towards playing 30 minutes, and I'm projected right now for 31. 31 minutes for certainly a reasonable fantasy producer at center, and one of the best center matchups in the game against the Clippers, who have been giving it up so sweet at center for the vast majority of the year. I really like that. Now, that is obviously the uber chalk, so that's I think I'd still end up coming in over that, but that's about the number. So shout out to everybody out there. Good job seeing that. But yeah, I'd have a pretty good amount of interest in him.
Yeah, I'm with you. He projects just too well to avoid, and like you mentioned, the Clippers is such a profitable matchup overall for centers.
I have him at 33.5 fantasy points. He costs 4,500. I don't, and Bagley is out, which certainly makes you feel a little more secure about how those minutes are going to go. So yeah, I can't get away from it.
So our telepathic telekinesis is kicking in again. 33.4 for me and Willie. So we're right there.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, hard to avoid that. The ceiling not great, but I feel like if this were a night where you have Jokic, you have Towns, you have Vucevic, then maybe not a great Willie Cauley-Stein night, but a night where there's no center who you're like, I need to have that guy because he's going to go massive. Maybe Nurkic, but even then, it's not the greatest matchup in the world. I think it's a good night for Willie to be chalk if he is going to be chalk.
Yep, I do not differ with you, sir.
Number 2 on the list, Harry Giles, another big who should theoretically benefit from Marvin Bagley being sidelined with a knee sprain. 27% projected ownership on DK, where he's about the near minimum, or at the near minimum, about the minimum. How are we feeling about Harry Giles being that highly owned?
I would have 0.
0. Okay, I like that.
I have no reason to expect his role to change whatsoever. So, I mean, it's $3,100 Harry Giles playing his 18 to 21 minutes against the Clippers, but it has nothing to do with much of anything. There's one less big in the house, so if, Bielitsa stubs his toe really badly on the way there and they continue to give Kostakouffis the middle finger, but it seems to me that people seem to think that all of a sudden you're getting 30 minutes of Harry Giles, and I would love to see that. I actually have a Harry Giles jersey. I'm a huge fan. I've been going Harry Giles, Kevin Garnett for a long time. I'm way over the field on my Harry Giles love, but if he's 27%, and he won't be, by the way, Spellman is going to eat into that. That number has to come down. But even if he's 20, 18, I would want 0. Matchup's great, dude's super cheap, but I'm totally fine if you want to do it again. He costs nothing, and it's not like you are locked into production with Amari Spellman. So if we turn around and we look at a couple other updates and we're 10 minutes before lock and we think Spellman's going to be 30% and he's going to be 18, then I'm certainly perfectly fine with somebody running Giles out there instead. But yeah, I don't want chalky Giles.
Okay, yeah, no, I think I'm with the field on Giles because I think the upside's there. I also think as a pivot to Willie Cauley-Stein, it's an interesting play because Willie pick up fouls. Willie screws up in a million different ways.
Sure.
But I think your points are pretty valid, and I think he shouldn't be the number 2 on player on the slate.
Right, that's what I'm saying. I can start listing guys who cost less than 4K who would have more interest in playing than Harry Giles, but there would be a significant number of them. I'd rather go with Beverley, who I listed 3 players I'd rather play than. So he'd be well down my list. I like Harry Giles just fine, but I have him for 19.5 minutes and 20.1 fantasy points. And by the way, you should not want that. People who are like, oh, for 3K, I'm happy for that. No. You never want anyone who doesn't get you 30, basically, barring really strange circumstances. So the other day, people were like, hey, I'm really excited for Dirk. And I'm like, I have him projected for 19. He could hit another, fairly ceiling game for him and get you 23 or 24. I have no interest in that. So unless you think there's some reasonable chance that maths out for you versus his expected ownership that he drops 30 for you, I have no interest. And on a slate like tonight that is going to be massively high scoring, I'm pretty sure, anything less than 24 out of Giles is an abject failure, which I think is what you get 60 or 70% of the time. So we're looking at a player who I project to fail versus his projection the majority of the time and be the second or third highest owned player on the slate. I have no interest.
Yeah, no, I think that all makes sense. I think the only times it pans out is like when you have a night where you have Towns and Harden putting up 95, and then that's the only way you could afford is to get both those guys in there. And then you could take a 20, 24,
sure.
25.
I have him much, much, much worse than Spellman. I mean, talking about Amari Spellman for a little bit here, we had the last game all right, so it's not just games John Collins missed. You looked at when John Collins was one of my favorite plays of the night a few weeks ago. He went out and got his face busted and had a massive gash and did not play. So he had, I think, 32 fantasy points with 2 minutes left in the second quarter. And caught a nasty elbow from someone and sat the remainder of the game. And Spellman ended up playing 30 minutes in that game. Then you had the one game since he came back full-time that Collins missed. Spellman was also out. But then there was the whole chunk of games that Spellman missed earlier this year. And if you go back and look, Spellman plays 27, 28, 30, 27, 28 minutes. We don't even have Miles Plumlee in the rotation who was present at that time. So I conservatively have Spellman for 31 minutes. He is a very inconsistent fantasy producer. He is very capable of giving you 12 tonight, which is one of the reasons I could tolerate someone running out Giles, certainly, because Spellman can obviously fail, but matchup with the Bulls is an exceptional one. I think he averages out north of 30 fantasy points, so 3,700 on FanDuel, 3,100 on DraftKings. I can't get away from them.
All right, yeah, those are all pretty salient points there. Number 3 on the list, Bogdan Bogdanović, 26% expected ownership on DraftKings. How does Daddy feel about old Bogdan?
I'd want less than that. I like Bogdan a lot. He's coming off monster game. He much more likely to pick up minutes than Harry Giles, for example. I will take any side bet from anyone here. If you amortize Bogdan Bogdanović's last 5 games and Harry Giles' last 5 games, and then compare the relative minutes differential over each of their next 5 games, that Bogdan picks up more minutes than Giles does from Bagley's injury, for what it's worth. So I think he's just fine. There's just a million wing players in that 5.5K range I like a lot, so I don't need to take the most popular one. There's even, 5 or 6 of them in excellent pace-up speed matchups like this. So he's great. He projects fine. But that's just people reacting to the fact that he came off a massive game. If a guy puts up, 20, 30, 40, 20, 30, 40, 20, 30, 40, 60, and his, ownership doubles for the next game, more than likely you're getting 20, 30, or 40 again, not another 60. So I think that's everyone else zigging, and you should zag in that case.
All right, let's go to number 4 on the list, Al Horford at 25% expected ownership. How does Daddy feel about that?
Yeah, again, I would come in under that number. He's obviously in a great matchup with the Wiz at home. They're particularly poor at rebounding, though they're going to slowly continue to get a little better with Portis around, who's doing a slightly better job than the guys he's filling in for. I'm fine with it. He is underpriced there for what's a very strong matchup. I think I would still have less than that. I'm really focused on these late night games and the Bulls and the Hawks. So I just find those all to be, slightly better game environments, and Horford's minutes, barring super tight games, tend to trend towards that 30-minute range. So there's just other guys I like a little bit more. So I think I'd have a little less than that, but there's nothing wrong with any amount of exposure on DraftKings to Al Horford. That FanDuel price where you're paying an extra $1,300 and then becomes center only eligible is obviously an entirely different ball game. But yeah, Al Horford at 63 is juicy. That's just fine.
Yeah.
But I again would come in with a little bit less. This is a vast oversimplification of an obviously complicated situation, but there are just a trillion great plays tonight. I don't need to play the popular ones. I'm saying I like Al Horford a lot. I like tons of other power forwards a ton too. I will play some of the other ones who are 10% owned instead of him at 27.
So our ownership has shifted around a little bit, but now number 5 on the list, who just got bumped up in this recent update, which just came out 2 minutes ago. So if you want to see the full update, use the promo code live before lock, get 50% off your first month to get access to all the ownership projections, as well as the premium Slack, which is popping off right now with people talking. So go use that promo code and get in there. So it's shifted around. It's still relatively the same. It's still the same 4 guys, but number 5 now is new. Omari Spellman moving up to 25%. So how are you feeling about that, Daddy?
Yeah, that's what I figured. And again, I think you're going to end up with somewhere slightly north of 30% on Spellman and somewhere in the high teens for Giles. I would, Spellman being the one somewhat chalky guy, I would still stick with today. I like his spot a lot, and the minutes just really, really should be there. So $3,100, I'm going to play 30 minutes in what's still an above average matchup. I'm in on that. I also have no issue if you want to try some Alex Len tonight, by the way. The minutes have been gone. I think he's literally scored in single-digit fantasy points in 3 consecutive games. But this is a spot in which he could do exceptionally well. And if anything goes squirrely with either Spellman or Dedmon, you get that 30-minute upside out of him. So certainly not someone you can count on. But if you're running 150 lineups, I would have more than 0 shares of Alex Len while we're discussing the Hawks. To continue on that team for a second, obviously the backcourt rotation has gotten a little bit congested. I would, again, prefer, even at that minimum price, I would rather pay, if I have the $500, $3,500 for Kevin Huerter rather than Bembry. Bembry really has a minutes in the teens downside that you're going to see 1 out of 3 games or something like that. He has a minutes in the teens upside. Like, he can get up to 30, but just his minutes project much, much worse than Kevin Huerter's. So, no issue with you playing minimum priced Bembry. He's fine. He objectively plots out quite nicely. But again, following the I really want to get 30 fantasy points rule, which is not a bad rule of thumb, especially on a slate that, again, I think we can safely project to be on the higher scoring end of the spectrum. I would much rather run a lot of other guys than Bembry. Bembry's fine for me, but he's your 3K sort of dart guy. I don't know if maybe I've just heard more about Bembry today than other people, but I've had a lot of Bembry questions with his pricing, what I presume is some manner of pricing error. Like, he should be 3,800 or some relatively small figure, but him sinking all the way down to the minimum on DK is a little bit curious. Yeah,
I think he fits the criteria you're talking about, where he's not likely to get you that 30 points that he just had the other day, fantasy wise. It seems more like a low 20s play, which was a great value. Like, I think he's playable maybe in cash as a cheap guy, but
Right.
Even then, it's still pretty risky.
So again, just to step into the game theory of it for a second, looking at a guy, there are certainly scenarios in which you can see, and we've seen it happen many times this year, where a guy costs the minimum and puts up 20, 22, 24 fantasy points and ends up in the best possible lineup. But basically what that means is you need one or more massive fantasy producers, and not that many who score well in the minimum range. So for example, yesterday it could work fine, because literally the fantasy points were 95 for Harden, 60 for Westbrook, 55 for Simmons, 50 for a couple other guys, and way the hell down. So if you built a lineup, and I helped somebody build a late slate lineup that took in a couple grand, that was Harden, Westbrook, Simmons, and some other dudes, and the other dudes were all 3,500 guys, and they all did fine. It was Terrence Ferguson and Bam Adebayo and Kelly Olynyk and whoever the hell. And it was basically best possible lineup, even on the medium-sized late slate, because the scoring producers were expensive and so clustered towards the top. I don't think that's likely to be the case, because there's infinite guys who cost 5 and 6K I think are going to get us 40. So it just doesn't make sense that 3K getting you 22 is ever going to frequently work out mathematically. So again, DFS, you got to sort of be on a pivot and play each slate differently. Also, BJ Johnson available to make his Hawks debut, so that's a couple more minutes to come out there. I would be disinclined towards it. If you told me I can play Bembry now and he gets me 25, I probably pass. So, I mean, that's what you're like. If you literally said, I will give you 25 points for that spot for 3K, I probably don't want it. But, it's just how you see the slate breaking down. So, yeah, yesterday it worked great. Today, I don't think it does for you. There's just enough guys in that medium range who I think have exceptional games. You don't need to get that guy. But that changes. I mean, if you think on today's slate, Giannis and LeBron each get you 100 and no one else gets you 60, then I can see that working out. Although I still imagine your best lineup ends up being Giannis, LeBron, and some of these great $4,500 plays. I still don't think you probably want to get down to him. And if you do, I still think you're playing Spellman first. So, yeah, so for all those reasons, that's more time than either of them deserved. Both Giles and Bembry would be pretty low for me. Horford, at least in an above-average matchup, I think gets 30 minutes, so 40 is in play. Not that 40 is out of play for DeAndre Bembry, but you need the minutes and the production to both hit. Horford should get his 30 minutes, so so that's where I come down on those guys.
So I've got two branched questions here, which are related to what you just talked about. Marcus Morris, does he make more sense to play than a chalky Spellman on FanDuel?
You're spending an extra $1,200 or so does he make more sense to play? I project him for fewer fantasy points. He's a very strong tournament play. In your cash lineup, no, you want to play Spellman, because, he's fine if you don't get to score him because of the FanDuel scoring, and he's fine if you do, if he randomly gives you the 35. So he's just going to make more sense than Morris from any sort of points per dollar allocation, but I'm totally fine with you not playing him and playing Marcus Morris in a tournament. I think that's great. It's not a difficult world to imagine getting 15 out of Spellman and 32 out of Marcus Morris, and all of a sudden you look great. So does it make sense? Yes, in general, in a tournament lineup, I'm absolutely fine doing that. I wouldn't advocate it, but it depends what else you're doing with your lineup, what games you're focusing on, the odds that you think that comes down the way you're particularly trying to steer your lineup towards. So it really depends a lot on what else you're doing, but yeah, in general, I'm absolutely fine with you making that pivot.
Another related question, who is more likely to fail, Willie Cauley-Stein or Spellman, and what's the probability that they both fail?
That's great. I like reducing these really, really complicated mathematical things to a subtle binary there. What are the odds they both... All right, so I will define failing for our circumstances as a score that kills you. So if Willie Cauley-Stein gives you 27, I'm not going to call that a fail. Because in theory, you can still win a GPP if you noted the other 7 spots. Like, I'm going to say, we'll define failure as under 25 for Willie and under 20 for Spellman. Their odds of failure are probably greater for Spellman for a couple reasons. I'd probably go that the Spellman odds are about 40% and the Willie odds are 25 to 30. And then doing some simple math, that would place the odds on both those things occurring at 10 or 12%, depending whether or not I pick 25 or 30 for Willie. So that's the completely out of my ass mathematical take on those two guys failing.
We also just got an ownership update. If you are a premium member, if you're not, use that promo code LiveBeforeLock while it's still good. And also you can use it for the night slate, so get in there now. Thoughts on Robin Lopez for our guy Greek Inc., in particular on FanDuel?
Yeah, I like him more on FanDuel, obviously. Same price, dollar per dollar, both sites. He's $4,900. The ownership should be low enough. I'm absolutely fine with that. Last game didn't play as many minutes, but was a monster and put up a giant score. A couple games before that was playing like 36, 38 minutes. So you're just seeing enough time out of him against the Hawks. And I think his ownership is well lower than it should be because he's not a sexy name. You don't want to be playing. This is, again, we're sitting here going, this is a massive slate. Everyone is going to completely go the fuck off. I'm going to play Sideshow Bob. It just feels awkward, but it's best possible matchup for him. So I mean, what do you project for Robin Lopez in 35 minutes against the Hawks? That feels pretty good. So yeah, I'm a big fan of playing Robin Lopez there.
I think it's a very viable Willie Cauley-Stein pivot in particular.
Sure.
I think
What's Willie cost on FanDuel? I actually don't know offhand for some reason. I feel like it's well more. So I think on FanDuel he's just a better play. DK is $400 more, but he's certainly, to me, in play both sides.
Yeah, Willie's still $5,500 on FanDuel, so cheap, but not as cheap as for sure as on DraftKings.
Yep. So you're still saving a sixer there. So
let's see. Rank Lowry, Kemba, Drew, and Dame for a Yahoo utility GPP.
I'm not going to take a guess at their ownership because I haven't spent enough time looking at Yahoo today. So Lowry is by far the worst of those. Kemba, Drew, and Dame. If he's asking me to include price, I don't know them offhand. So I'm just going to speak towards raw points, what I expect out of those guys. I'll go with Beverley, Kemba, Drew, Lillard, but I like all three of those guys roughly evenly. I think I have my, hold on, I have my Yahoo prices downloaded. I will look, and if they all cost the same, then I'll know he's asking me just pointsy. Let's see. You got Lillard at 38, Drew at 39, Kemba at 39. Lowry, I don't even see, so I'm presuming well less, 33. So I guess he is asking me to include price there. Yeah, that's. I mean, this is a lot of these guys in this price range are great. I like all those guys you just mentioned a little bit more than $4,200 or $42 rather. Kyrie, but 39 for Kemba, 39 for Drew, 38 for Lillard. Lillard is probably the best tournament play because the ownership's going to be non-existent next to those other guys. And it's the play I'm least confident in. I mean, I have watched all those games multiple times. I like the micro matchup versus Lowry extremely significantly. That being said, that's not a massive sample size. And on paper, this poses to be a more defensive matchup between two of the best 4 or 5 defensive teams in the NBA right now. Spending all your money on one of those point guards is dangerous, and having watched them play against each other for 120 minutes probably on the court together over the last 4 years is dicey. But I think I can make a convincing case that the upside is there, and you're looking at 3% ownership for him versus 12, 15, and 25 on those other 3 guys. So I still think it's very much in play for me. If you're trying to win a tournament, I probably end up playing Lillard there for the reduced ownership. Most of the rest of the time, I think I go with Kemba, who's pretty damn safe and does have a big ceiling in this spot. The 4th time this year that we've gotten Charlotte and Brooklyn together, and Kemba's unsurprisingly looked extremely good. The Nets, again, I'm super worried with. They're on the front end of a back-to-back, which is just one more reason to hate this team. Spencer Dinwiddie is back. Mm-hmm. That adds Dinwiddie starts going off and you get less time out of D'Angelo. It's not like D'Angelo's price is cheap anymore. The wings are a goddamn mess. Yeah, I'd need to be into several lineups before I played anyone other than certainly D. Russ or maybe Jared Allen. But even Jared Allen, there's just so many centers I like more. So I'd have to be well into the trough until I got to the Nets.
I have one Karis LeVert just because he was so bad the other day where I feel like, why not?
I'm a huge fan of, I mean, it's not a bad matchup. And he, you would think Dinwiddie back obviously does not help this plan, but should have gotten back into playing 30 minutes a night. You could argue he's the best player on this team, period. All stop. Like, you can argue he is a better basketball player than anyone else on this team, all things considered. So, at some point, they should get him back there. So, I don't hate that. But it's just, again, it's a night where I love tons of guys, many of whom are just going to be 5 or 7% on that I have a fair amount of confidence in. There's just so much shit up in the air with Brooklyn, I'd need to be a lot of lineups in. So, if I'm building 150 lineups, sure, I like 3 shares of Karis the Green. But elseways, he would come pretty late on that pile for me.
Yeah, I'm at 1 out of 20 on Karis. But, anytime a guy has a day that bad and the world hates him, I feel like it's not the worst thing to throw him in a lineup just to see how it goes. Let's see. We got some either or, so I don't want to hit those quite
Let
yet.
me take a minute and run my grind down and make sure I don't have any other like hot takes on guys, because the worst thing for me is at like 7:35 I'm like, oh, I love this guy, I forgot to mention him, and then he like destroys, and I'm like, yeah, that was malfeasance on my part, so I hate it when that goes that way. In general, with the Bulls, again, I will give a third shout out for Chris Dunn, which is the 3 more shout outs than I have given to him all year. I am much higher on Chris Dunn than most people and much lower on Trae Young. I'm fine with you playing Trae Young. John Collins being out adds the upside. You can get 60 out of Trae Young tonight, but Chris Dunn is an extremely above-average defender, and was very effective against him in the earlier matchup this year with the Hawks versus the Bulls. Trae Young shot, I think, 1 for 12 in that game, and the floor is there too. So, again, in the world of 8K guards, where I'm talking about all these other guys I love, from Kemba to Drew to Kyrie to Damian Lillard, Young is pretty far down that list for me. Like, he is probably like my 12th favorite point guard. So, yeah, I guess that's the best description I can give with you there. But I'm obviously a big fan of the Bulls here. Laurie is my favorite one in tournaments. I like all the starting 5, and you should against the Hawks. We've watched this again and again this year, where if you have a starting 5 who we can expect to see a preponderance of minutes, and that is the case here, you usually have 3 of them being good to great, at least. So I probably slightly rank them, and again, this changes site by site and salary by salary. My desire to play them in a tournament is probably Markkanen, Dunn, Levine, Porter, Lopez, but I really like playing Robin Lopez. So just giving you an idea on a scale of 1 to 10 how much I like playing these guys in a tournament. Markkanen is probably a 9.5. Lopez is probably an 8.5. I have a lot of appeal for guys in this game. So, quick take on them. Much less on the Hawks. Pace boost, not quite that much. I will say Dedmon will go underrun from where I expect him to be. I will say I like Taurean Prince. I think there's some chance they go small. His price is still way too cheap. And he's playing today before taking at least 1 or 2 games off for the expectant birth of his child in a few days. So maybe he's got some extra motivation. Hey,
congratulations, Taurean Prince family. The Waller Prince family thriving.
Hey, son, on Friday I put up 30 for you. So Taurean Prince is still cheap enough. I've spent way more time on Beverley and Horford, neither of which I think are that important in the world of Amari Spellman. So I will not belabor those points any further. Done Celtics and Wizards enough. Done Portland and Raptors enough. Outside of, you want to play Pascal Siakam, the guy's transcendent. I'm perfectly happy with that. In any format, if you want to run that out there. But the price isn't great and the game isn't great. Nurkic in tournaments, Lillard in tournaments. I'm happy to move on with my day. Marc Gasol on DK in tournaments. I'm fine with that as well. Did that in depth. Montrezl Harrell. Been, unsurprisingly, extremely good in this matchup. If I'm stacking this game, I'm probably going with the centers. And that center can include Ivica Zubac as well. If you want to go with that at like 4K, I don't think he's out of play, but certainly Red Tips Montrezl Harrell would be the first guy upon which I would plant my flag.
No Lou Williams. Lou Williams is a guy I'm very heavy on today.
The ceiling is massive. Again, there's just so many guards that I'm a huge fan of. He's a little more than I want to spend. There's guys who I project similarly for $1,000 less or $1,500 less, so it's hard to get away from Alfreds, or not want to spend a little more for Drew against the Suns, but I'm certainly never objecting to anyone playing Lou Will in a tournament in an above average matchup. He has never met a shot he doesn't like. So
yeah, just 10%. Lou Will is one of my guys. I guess it's up to 13 now, but he's one of the guys I'm a little heavier on than I probably should be, because I think this matchup fits him like a glove. So fingers crossed on Lou.
I cannot blame you for that. Yeah.
Somebody had a good question here about, when you have, okay, this is a weird question. When you have safe value in quotes such as Spellman, do you agree that it makes sense to play a second punt or drop as FanDuel? Now, you mentioned Spellman not actually that safe. He has like about a 12-point floor, but let's take this question at face value. How would you respond to that?
I do think for most min-value punt, he is safer than your average. So it's a little complicated to think about, but he is generally safer than I think your average $3,700 guy who you're running in your main slate lineup on FanDuel. So I would characterize him as safe. There is a distinct chance of failure, but price, minute, security, matchup, all those things make it more unlikely that he would fail relative to other people in that position at that price tag. It depends. I wouldn't go so far as to say it makes sense to run another guy who's going to do X, Y, and Z. I have no objection to it, but your goal... I think his point is, if you think Spellman gets you 30, are you comfortable dropping 30? Like, that's sort of what he's saying. Like, is it then wrong that you didn't make another pivot somewhere, pay down on someone else to pay up on someone else if you presume you will not drop Spellman? So I will agree with your corollary as a theorem. Yes, you're correct that if you think your one really cheap guy you think is going to get home for you, generally it does make sense to pay down further somewhere else and pay up further. That would be a mathematical truism. But as with everything, it's subject to slate and other whims. So I'm not super forcing it if there's not some other value you're looking at and in love with. But yeah, I think you're fine to do so.
All right, let's speed round some questions here. Do you think Nemanja Bjelica gets some minutes today?
I will say yes. I think he gets some minutes. I don't have a need to chase up that particular treat, but yeah, I do think he will re-enter the rotation and play. I think they will dust him off, which is a shame. I had him on my season-long fantasy team for most of the year, and he was just brilliant. And then Bagley started getting good, and they're like, I guess you don't have to play anymore, which sucked. But that's how that goes.
Yeah, I put in one Bjelica lineup just in case, so I think that's a fair thought process, but I think that's about my stake. 1 in 20 is about where I'd go.
Oh, I don't even think I can't consider playing him. I think he's a low option. I think they throw more minutes at Harrison Barnes. I think they throw minutes at Bogdan.
Yes, I agree.
I don't think you get more than 20 minutes out of him. So I would strongly advocate against actually playing him.
Okay, that's fair. I just like his random 40-point days always make me happy, and I've gotten the benefit of them before. So for old time's sake, I gave Bjelica some run. But yeah, I agree.
I'm fine with it. But yeah, I would be disinclined towards actually.
Yeah, there's better guys.
Yeah, he doesn't seem worth a play right now, just because there's a non-zero chance he does not play. If he plays, I would project his minutes for like 14. So could you get 26 minutes and 35 fantasy points at a great matchup out of Bjelica here? Sure, but he's way down the list of guys I actually want to, take a shot at. So,
can you play Spellman and Len in a FanDuel GPP together?
Yes. Anytime guys cost that little, the answer is going to be yes to your question. There are no 2-4. I mean, you need a really I guess you're getting towards it with like Jared Allen and Ed Davis, who specifically will never share their court together. Right. Almost certainly, it basically never happens. Maybe not, but you can have Spellman next to Len. Like it'd be winning a tournament where Dewayne Dedmon gets 2 fouls in 4 minutes, and you get 35 minutes of Spellman and 32 minutes of Len is certainly a high possibility. They're probably actually. I mean, you sort of ignore the negative correlation because they're so cheap, but they're probably still net positively correlated, those two players. Even though they're on the same team, both playing bigs, just because there's greater positive correlation from overtimes and other things than there is negative correlation from reduced performance, just because performance is so relative to price.
Let's see. Is it crazy for this guy to build a cash lineup with no LeBron or Giannis?
No, that's not crazy at all. I don't know if I'd have any in my cash lineup. There's just a ton of guys who are underpriced. So just playing a pile, like DraftKings, if you're talking about, playing a pile of guys who cost 6, 7, 8K who you expect to score 45, in theory, you can throw with the argument that is more cashy being, to interpret as more consistent because, if LeBron fails, you fail. But if you break up all that expenditure into multiple different sources as opposed to loading it down all on one source, you're giving yourself some insurance. It's like instead of owning one 50,000 square foot store, if you own 5 10,000 square foot stores, you're inured against any number of negative things that can happen to you. It's the same theory. So no, I don't think it's crazy at all not to admit. LeBron's a great play. Giannis is not a cash play at all for me, by the way. I'm with the news we have. Don't play Giannis in cash. I'll specifically say that's a bad idea. But no, not having LeBron in cash is fine. I presume he would be present in, if I built 100 optimal cash lineups, I presume he would be present in somewhere to the area of 30 or 40% of them. But you're fine if you have a cash lineup without Bron in it.
Here's a guy you touted a little bit. Would you prefer Chris Dunn or Rondo in a FanDuel GPP?
I would prefer Dunn in a GPP. I imagine Rondo is going to be, 20% owned, give or take a little bit, and Chris Dunn is going to be 4%. So I'll play Chris Dunn. I like Rondo a lot. I have Rondo projected a little higher, but if I was building one lineup, I would have Dunn over Rondo. Or I'm looking at the FanDuel tinker I have in front of me in my database, and I think it's actually both of them. So.
All right, one-word answers. We've got some either ors. Let's try to get them in before lock. Booker or Kemba for a DK.
30 seconds before lock, so.
So it's not going to get there anyway, but let's do it because I like to talk fast. Booker or Kemba for DK GPP?
I will take Kemba right now.
Brolo or Rolo for DK GPP?
I will take Rolo. Great question.
Dunn or Elf FanDuel GPP?
I will take Dunn. It's $900 differential in salary there, so it's a bit of an odd question, but I'm a slightly bigger fan of playing Chris Dunn between those two players.
Randall Spellman or Harris Barnes FanDuel Cash?
Randall Spellman.
All right, now we're locked. All right, so that one probably didn't get in before. I think we did. I think we got those ones in there before lock, though. I think the other four we got before lock. Yeah, the other either ors we can just hit them. Well, what are the games that are kicking off now? I don't know who's locked and who's not.
That's a good question.
Yeah, we got a lot of questions coming in late. For future reference, guys, it's a little easier if you do have either ors to stack them up earlier, so I can kind of blow through them and have them ready. But put them in like 5 minutes before lock, there's a decent chance.
Two pretty good games at lock. We got Chicago and Atlanta and Brooklyn and Charlotte going off. Let me straighten a couple things, then we'll go.
So here's a relevant question then. How far is the gap between Kawhi, Kyrie, and Beal?
Not significant. I think in my projections I have them within a differential of about 3. Let me reload those back up, but yeah, I would have them all in the same wheelhouse certainly. Give me a sec, taking a minute extra to load here, but
sure. While you're doing that, another either or, Giles or Marcus Morris?
Oh, Marcus Morris. That's a FanDuel question, but I think they're about the same price, believe it or not. I could be wrong there, but
really, Jesus Christ, FanDuel. What a weird place. It's like Canada to me. I have no clue what's going on there. There's health care for everybody. Everybody seems happy, but really cold for some reason. It's very confusing.
It's a hive of scum and villainy. Someone said difference between Chris Dunn and Elf. I think I just saw a message only $400 on FanDuel. Because I think there was the question to which I answered that was a FanDuel question, and I thought they were 55 and 64. Did I get that wrong?
I don't know. I don't have FanDuel in front of me right now. Let's see. Morris.
What was the guys? Beal, Kawhi, and who was the third guy I was comparing there?
Beal, Kawhi, Kyrie.
I have Beal, Kawhi, and Kyrie all between 44 and 48 fantasy points. I nominally have Kyrie the highest, but not a big difference.
Thoughts on Patrick Beverley? He is a guy we didn't talk about that matchup. I'm never a Beverley guy because he doesn't get the ball a lot, and you got to rely on peripherals, which aren't always there. But how are you feeling about Pat Bev?
Yeah, I'm again, Pat Bev a tough spot for me to go today. Again, we're talking about all these point guards we like in a not dissimilar price range. So obviously I'd rather play Rondo, I'd rather play Dunn, I'd rather play Elf, I'd rather play a lot of these other guys. The price isn't as cheap as it used to be, but especially for stacking that game, I have no issue with someone running Patrick Beverley, in a tournament. The minutes have obviously been there, so it's a reasonable tournament play.
Randall and Bogdan or Beverley and Markkanen? Related question.
I'll go with Randall and Bogdan.
Kuzma or Horford?
I will very slightly prefer Al Horford, but I have them projected almost identically.
Yeah, I slightly prefer Horford as well, but I think Kuzma's got, I don't know. I think they both have comparable upside, but Kuzma, I think, has a ceiling which we haven't seen in a while, which could come today. That would be my...
Certainly possible. Again, I think Rondo back ends up netting him out a little bit less, but what did I say for Spellman? I think he gets a hair over 30% by the time we're done. 30.2. There you go.
Oh, so that was our last update had him at 35%. Actually, am I on? No, I'm on FanDuel. Never mind.
Yeah, on DK, the last one you gave me was 25, and I'm like, I think he gets a touch over
30.
There
was one more that came through and bumped Spellman to number 1, which I think went back down. So yeah, he ended up for our projections at 28%, so still right in there.
Okay, yeah, I thought he would just clear 30 and 30.2, so that was I'll give you a hint.
So you win this round, Eduardo.
Very, very lucky. Yes, I got the algorithm by 2%.
The projections will get you next time.
I snuck one in there. I'd have gotten away with it, too, if it weren't for those kids. So, Trae Young, 36%, I think his insanity is the most highly owned player. Look, I totally get it. John Collins is out now, and he has been just jacking up threes left and right. But he has the worst individual matchup on the team. And I get 36%. Like, I think he's an absolutely fine play, but where, again, I have exactly one game sample size of watching him play against Chris Dunn, but I was impressed with how Chris Dunn played him, and I think he continues to do so. So 36%, I want none of that. Same price, Kemba Walker, 26%. I've outright projected for 7 more fantasy points. I'm obviously a much bigger fan of that. Sandwich in between Trae Young and Kemba Walker. This is a pretty picture. 30%, as we mentioned, for Amari Spellman. Next, Zach LaVine at 17%. I would much prefer that to Trae Young. Next, Lauri Markkanen, 16%. Yep, he's great. I have him projected really, really high today. I have him just under 50, so big fan of Lauri here. Kevin Huerter, 16%. Way to go, Internet. Look at that. I thought you were gonna screw it up and all Bembry yourselves, and so there you go. Huerter, 16%. So see, I was worried about nothing. Porter, 13%. Great, no problem. Any of these Bulls guys at that number are gonna be really nice. Jeremy Lamb, 13%. Sure, I didn't talk about the Hornets as much as I wanted to. I actually like Cody Zeller a fair amount in tournaments. Excepting the one game he fouled out, they're running him out there 34, 35 minutes. This is a spot I project him for more than a fantasy point a minute. I still don't think he makes my top 5 or 6 centers, but if I'm building a lot of lineups, I would rather play him than Jared Allen across the ball, for example. He doesn't compete with, he has almost the exact same projection as Willie Cauley-Stein. Is actually a little better than Willie's, but just because of price, he wouldn't be first guy in there. But Zeller makes sense, Lamb makes sense, Walker makes sense. Match was pretty good for all 3 of those guys. So I was a fan of having a Hornet in there if you could, which I didn't actually say in so many words. Dewayne Dedmon, 9.5%. I like that a lot. Like I said, I thought he'd be underrepresented where he should be. He's played well, gotten his time. The most likely scenario out of him is, 28 minutes and 35 fantasy points or something. So that feels pretty good. There is Zeller at 9%. I'd want a little bit more than that. Bembry at 7.5%. That's fine. He's min price. D'Angelo Russell, 7.2. We obviously talk about the strengths and weaknesses of that play. Chris Dunn at 6. Feels good. I like it. That's apparently a guy ended up... I don't think he's the greatest play in the universe, but he got a lot of mentions today, so I'll have to own that if he doesn't do well. Marvin Williams, 4.6. That's fine. You expect him to get 30 minutes, and what's a pretty good matchup. And that price is way the hell down, so you can't complain about that. Jared Allen, 3.5. Taurean Prince, 3.2. I would rather run... the symbol Prince out there. Joe Harris, 3.1. I'm not going with the wings. Now, Joe Harris is the guy they put the irrational amount of minutes on. So if they're sitting there going, okay, we have only so many minutes, and they got to go to, Trevion Grant and Damari Carroll and Alan Crabb and Joe Harris, they will give Joe Harris irrationally many. Not to say that he isn't a very good player.
They also had that quote from Atkinson about feeding Joe Harris more threes. I didn't realize he's like the 4th leading 3-point attempt guy on the team, even though he's shooting 50% from deep. It's very stupid.
Yeah, he's a sublime shooter. Now, it has something to do with his inability to get open. It's not like it's not like, D'Angelo's driving up the court and goes, I got Joe Harris open, I'm going to pass it over to Rondé. Like, that's not what's happening. Like, he has some responsibility for getting open, so I don't think it's as much of a systemic failure as it sounds. But, him taking more 3-pointers would be good for that team. Robin Lopez, 2.5%. Obviously love that. Alex Len, 2.5%. Way to represent, Internet. That's half us, I think. That's half.
Apparently, our boy Tom, our COO, who's one of the better DFS players in the world, according to many of the popular rankings out there, played him in a single entry for $50 today, according to the guys in the premium Slack.
Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. I get now, single entry is a little bit risky because there is still a perilous floor there. Like you can get. I think this is a matchup where you likely get 20 minutes there, and the 30 ceiling through foul trouble or some other shenanigans is in play. But the scenario where Vince Carter plays 16 minutes at the power forward and Alex Len plays a total of 11 minutes, it could happen. The single entry, that's some huevos. Ed Davis, 1.3 is fine. Karis LeVert, your boy, 1.3. Damari Carroll, 1.1. Don't do that. Spencer Dinwiddie 1, Alan Crabb 0.8. A lot of nets here. Kent Bazemore 0.75, Miles Bridges 0.71, Shobayaz 0.62, John Collins 0.5%. Congratulations, you played yourself. 0.5%. One out of 200 people both played him and didn't follow the news.
Yeah, that's not great. But you know what? I think we need to root for him in a time where he's suffering from an illness. So that support will mean a lot for him as he's in his bed.
That's nice.
Drinking some soup.
All right, I got to take off. I am getting in the car very shortly, driving to Tennessee to look at a dog. Yes, my wife runs my life. We're interviewing a dog before we offer him the position of being our dog for the next decade and change. So I am leaving immediately. I'll get in at 2 or 3 in the morning. Might be looking for some friends in the Nashville area tomorrow night. I will tweet the appropriate information if I do indeed go out and try to pick up a collective of people. We'll be leaving bright and early Sunday morning, so I am back here for my Sunday show. So I'll be gone for 36 hours, but managed to miss only one show. That's dedication, folks.
All right, so check Fast Eddie if you're out on Twitter. Good luck, Eddie, with the pooch. Rooting for you and the new addition to the family and your wife as well. Beautiful, Robin. Good, nice to hear from you. And everybody else, thank you guys for watching. Like the video on the way out. Check out the content this weekend, and we'll see you guys again soon.